I'm Kelsey Santini. I'm a Senior Customer Success Manager at Greenhouse. Part of my role at Greenhouse is to help some of our largest customers build and define their talent programs, both inside of Greenhouse and out. I'm joined on stage today by two talented talent acquisition leaders. I have Angela Mayhew, the Manager of Recruiting at FabFitFun, and Ashley Reid, the Senior Manager of Talent at Zola Inc. If you're here today, I'm assuming it's because you would like some help building your talent operations program. So to run through today's agenda, I'm going to first kick it off by defining what talent operations is and make sure we're all on the same page. I'll then turn it over to Ashley at Zola. She'll walk us through how she's been able to build and strategically and operationally her talent program. And then Angela will walk us through what Hypergrowth at FabFitFun was right. I'll wrap up with some key takeaways, and that's over to you, the audience, for Q&A. Sound good? Cool. So I want to think about talent operations as a function, not a role. There's definitely a lot of people who are moving into these talent operations manager roles, but we also recognize there's a lot of companies that just don't have that need quite yet at their size and scale. So when we think about everything that talent operations encompasses, it's usually around analyzing data, whether this is metrics that we need for leadership, team performance, all of that definitely rolls up under this. We'll also look at improving processes. How do our recruiters and hiring managers interact with each other? Vendor evaluations and relationships is a huge one, coming from a vendor at Greenhouse. This can include everything like ATS implementations. I definitely see a few of my customers have implemented out here. It can be CRM research. All of that rolls up as well. We'll look at internal programs like how do we build referrals? How do we handle internal applicants? Making sure we're forecasting our future talent needs, as well as looking at compliance and data audits. When we think about how talent operations does what it does, there's 5 key areas we generally see talent ops take steps. The first is research. Whether it's a new vendor, a new process, perhaps you're looking at a new program to build out, you need to understand what things are like today, what you're looking to achieve tomorrow, and what solutions are available. Once you have a solution, you need to implement it. I really advise investing fully in whatever program or process it might be, even if it doesn't feel quite right. You won't see the full value until you really go all the way. Once you implement something, you need to make sure that you adopt it. This definitely can be challenging. Change is scary. Not everyone likes to come around. So this is really an area where I recommend starting early and iterating very often throughout your process. Once you've adopted, I recommend stabilizing. I think this step is often overlooked and missed, but it's really important to give your team a time to breathe and catch up to what you've implemented. Use this time to also like a secondary research phase, understand what's working, what might change about the process. Once you have some of that knowledge, go ahead and optimize. This optimization phase should pretty much continue for the lifespan of your program, your vendor, your tool, whatever it might be. You should always be looking for areas to enhance. At some point, as you'll hear today, you might get to a point where the vendor or the process just doesn't work anymore, and you'll want to kick this process off all over again. When you think about the impact that this can have if it's done right, there's 3 big areas where I generally see this happen. The first one is reduction of risk. If we're doing routine compliance and data audits, we can protect the company reputation. In the eyes of the candidate, that can definitely help elevate your brand image. Transparency, making sure the right leaders know the right information at the right time. And effectiveness, making sure that all of our recruiters are being efficient and consistent in how they're building the program. If all of that's done right, you'll be doing great. In short, the best way I can sum this up, talent operations is everything about recruiting except finding the talent. We'll leave that to the recruiters. So what happens when you don't have a talent operations team? That's what we're here to answer today. So to kick us off, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Good? Still, you're with us? Okay, great. So as Kelsey mentioned, my name's Ashley Reid. I'm the Senior Talent Manager at Zola. I've been there for about 2 years now. Zola, for those of you that don't know, we are a Series D wedding retail company. We started out as a wedding registry. We're now into invitations in paper, wedding websites. If you're engaged, getting married, going to a wedding, anything of the sort, definitely check us out. I think it's pretty cool. Prior to coming to Zola, I had a pretty much career recruiter. I was a career recruiter. I worked at many different companies, most recent, Google. Everybody's always like, why did you leave Google? Why would you ever do that? And really for me, it was about going somewhere where I can make really good impact and really have a lot of transparency in the work that I do. And so I'm gonna take you through Zola's journey a little bit and tell you what that really looked like. So started there about 2 years ago. We were only 70 full-time employees, and we had 1 location headquartered in New York City. From there, we actually acquired a small wedding company, also brought on more people. That meant also another office. It basically put us in a position where we needed to figure out how we were going to manage all of these people that we were hiring, all of our individuals that were still at the company. And so that's when we started to think through what sort of systems are available for us to make sure that we were doing this as effectively and efficiently as possible. So throughout all of 2018, through the winter and the summer, doing my evaluation, doing my research, gaining an entire recruitment team, which was really exciting, and finally, in the fall of 2018, launching Greenhouse. It really put us in a great position because at that point, I was able to retrain my interviewers, really understand what my hiring managers' wants and needs were, and help them figure out how Greenhouse could be the best tool for them to utilize now that we've brought it in. So adopting that system completely. Now fast forward to where we are today. We're in 3 offices, 2 countries, over 160 full-time employees. Their journey was not easy. It did take a while, but I definitely want to share with you some of the challenges that we went through in order to get to that point in time. So in my opinion, hiring is literally everybody's business. It's not just the talent team. It's not just your recruiters. Everybody in your organization should be a part of hiring and recruiting the best possible people. And so some of the initial challenges that I ran into when I was literally the first and only hire that was focused on talent and HR at Zola after 4 years of being in process, is that my hiring managers were actually in charge of everything. They were running the process, they were the ones doing the interviews, they were doing the phone screens. Our applicant tracking system at that point in time, it was very elementary. Has anybody heard of Jazz before? Yeah, that was what we were using. Exactly. 2 people raised their hands. We were using Jazz. It just didn't fit quite right for us. Our feedback wasn't being captured. I think a lot of people can resonate with that, where your hiring teams are kind of writing things on Post-it notes, and they're coming into the debrief meeting and saying, yeah, I think this works. Like, this works out really well. I liked this guy or girl or whoever. And it made it really hard to make those final decisions. It was impossible, really, to figure out why we really wanted to bring these individuals into Zola and what made sense. So for me, it was really important to figure out how I can make this easy for everybody in the process. So for me, it was about consolidating the ownership. I came right in from the beginning and I said, let me take it over. I may just be one person, but I know this business a lot better than you guys do. So for me, it was about taking over. I ultimately ended up hiring a team. My recruiting manager, Kathleen, is out there. Super excited to have a team of recruiters now that are able to help us really streamline the process, make sure it makes sense for the various hiring managers. And her team became the subject matter experts. At that point in time, also making sure that my team could really implement the new applicant tracking system across the company. It can be scary to get a new system and try and launch it and get everybody on board. I remember when we first started doing our research on Greenhouse, our CEO and co-founder, Shan, was so involved in the process because she knew that this was something that everybody had to take on. It was something that everybody would ultimately have to use. And so she was involved in actually my negotiations with Greenhouse. She was really interested on how it would make a big impact for the organization as a whole. So definitely make sure that if you have those big leaders that you know are really invested in hiring in the organization, that they're a part of this evaluation and implementation process as well. Of course, we had to retrain all of our interviewers, make sure that they're using this system, putting the feedback in appropriately. And then there's that leadership adjustment, right? I'm sure you're used to those leaders that they never put feedback anywhere. They'll shoot you a Slack message and they'll say, yeah, this person sounds great, let's hire them. We couldn't do that anymore. And so for me, it was educating them and training them on how this actually would make their lives better and easier. Those small changes ultimately ended up making huge impact, right? So now that we have all these processes and expectations, we can start to really create accurate data. We have a tool that we can utilize to make sure that all that information makes sense and we can actually output and share it with leadership. So let's talk about data a little bit. Data integrity, I think, is really, really important, all right? So I am not an analyst. I am horrible at Excel. I am the first one to say, do not put me in front of SQL. It is not my jam. I can't handle it at all. And so what was really important to make sure that my leadership felt like they had access to good data. They invested in this wonderful tool. It's supposed to make it easier to hire, 1, but 2, also supposed to give us that really good information to make it ultimately the best way for people to make decisions on how to hire. How do we do that? First and foremost, centralize everything. Every single thing that we do with a candidate, it goes into the applicant tracking system. Also, in terms of ownership, number 2, our coordinator actually owns all of our data. She's the person that moves every candidate through the process. She's the person that moves them to that final offer stage, whether they accept, whether they decline. She, if we need her to, will ultimately pull reports so that we can report out to our leadership so that they better understand what's going on with all of our various processes. And then third, making those final decisions. It's so much easier once that data is there, and once we know there's one person owning it, there's no way you can have dirty data, right? It's really ultimately on that person. For us, it works. It works really well to just have one person. I know some teams are larger than that, and maybe you need a few different people to keep that data clean, but we're at 160 full-time employees, and one person works pretty fine for us. And so really a tip there is just for smaller companies, consider having just one person really owning that data, keeping it clean, and keeping that data integrity. So there's one report in particular that we use quite often that I want to share with you. So this is the time to hire report. For those of you that actually already have Greenhouse implemented at your organizations, you should really start setting realistic expectations for your hiring teams and their managers. For us, time to hire is so crucial as to how we hire individuals. I have one team in particular that they're really horrible at keeping candidates in process for weeks, months at a time. I'm sure a lot of people can kind of agree with me there. If I show them that I have a role that's been open for 2 months, 3 months, and that's simply because we have 3 stellar candidates sitting at the on-site phase, they get it. That's where they get it. They start to see the data, they see how the data can work for them. And so it's really important to make sure you utilize reports like the time to hire to give leadership visibility into what exactly is going on and setting those expectations for them. So as we start thinking about, what we really want to do moving forward and what makes sense for the organization, I think that we are in a few different phases. First and foremost, we're definitely at that hypergrowth phase. We're at that point where we're starting to think, how and when and where do we grow our recruiting teams? We have 3 offices in 2 different countries. What does that really mean for us? Does that mean that our recruiting team is going to grow only at headquarters? Does that mean that we need to start putting some of our recruiting heads in Montreal or in our Charlottesville office? We're not quite sure yet, but the data that you can find in your applicant tracking system and the way that you hire and the speed that you need to hire can definitely come from there. 2, automation. We are, again, reaching that hypergrowth phase. For us, our processes, how can they be a little bit easier? How can we make it easier not only for us as a talent organization, but also for the company as a whole? And then emphasizing, of course, 3, data, data, data. I don't think I realized when I started going into talent and recruiting that I would ultimately be a data analyst at the end of the day, but I am, unfortunately. And because I don't have a talent ops team, it's super important, even as somebody that doesn't love numbers, as somebody that doesn't understand them probably as well as all of the different data folks in our organization, it's so crucial to really be able to make an impact on the way that you hire, but more importantly, an impact on your hiring teams and the way that they respect your talent teams and respect your recruiting organizations.
Thanks, Ashley. If you think back to that journey I showed you earlier, Zola is very much in that research adoption phase. They're really focused on driving adoption across their company, standardizing how they use Greenhouse. I love what she said about hiring is everyone's business. Might drink the Kool-Aid a little bit since I do work for Greenhouse, but I think that's really valuable and important. I'm not a recruiter, I'm not a hiring manager, I'm an independent contributor. And just the other week, one of my recruiters for our team, we're building this new role that we haven't hired for yet. And she actually sent me the interview kit. And she's like, hey, something's missing. Can you take a look? Can you let me know what questions we might want to ask? You know the role we're looking for. So think creatively, think outside the box, see where there might be other opportunities to pull in your interviewers, your leaders, to help them feel a part of the process. That really helps drive adoption for us, and I think it might work for you. Up next, I'm gonna turn it over to Angela at FabFitFun.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Kelsey, thank you. So excited to be here and talk about 2 of my favorite things, FabFitFun and Greenhouse. So about me, I'm originally from upstate New York, but have been in LA for almost 10 years now. Currently, I am the manager of recruiting at FabFitFun. You may know FabFitFun from our seasonal subscription boxes. You might have been targeted in your Instagram feeds. But over the past year, we've really evolved into a premier women's lifestyle membership. As one of our co-founders and CEOs like to say, we are trying to be at the intersection of e-commerce, content, and community. Notably with FabFitFun, over the past 6 months, we surpassed 1 million annual members, and we're on our way to 2 million target by the end of the year. We raised our Series A in January of $80 million, and recently we just expanded to the UK. Prior, we only shipped our boxes to the US and Canada, but now we are excited to have members in the UK as well. So, growing with FabFitFun, hypergrowth has definitely seemed like an understatement. When I joined the company, we were only 50 employees. Presently, we stand at 600 employees. So how did we get there? There hadn't been much growth when I joined. There had been a ton of vendors, no process, but thankfully Greenhouse was already in place. So as the company began picking up speed in 2017, we needed to figure things out. Again, I was just the only recruiter, so we needed to start building that team. Our recruiting team had been fairly lean when we doubled in size in 2017, again in 2018, and our biggest challenge was the recruiter adoption in Greenhouse. When you're in hypergrowth, everything is just moving so fast, you're trying to keep your head above water, which makes it hard to follow best practices. So we needed to put that in place, and we realized that if we were going to scale that further adoption, like with the entire company and hiring teams, that it needed to start with us. And also, we're on this fast-moving train. We realized that we had so many vendors, and that just wasn't ideal. So it also was time to reevaluate and trim that down. So currently, where we're at with our growth, we got a note yesterday that we did reach 600 employees, split between our HQ in West Hollywood, California, and then also we have a new fulfillment center in Chino where our boxes are put together and shipped out. We are targeted to reach 800 employees by the end of the year. All right, so not to sugarcoat it, the hypergrowth has definitely felt like chaos, and chaos has reigned. My philosophy is recruiting isn't one size fits all, and in terms of adoption, we needed to start small and from the beginning. Not everyone was utilizing the ATS and Greenhouse, and not only hiring teams, but not even our own recruiting team. So when you have your recruiting team, you might have people coming from different backgrounds. I was using Greenhouse, but some people were more traditional. They like to take all of their notes on a piece of paper and printing out the resumes, or they had their own calendar that they were scheduling things in, or were just going rogue with offer letters and didn't use it in Greenhouse. So everyone was living outside of the system, again, chaos, and because of that, there was no formal way to actually review or interpret data. So a lot of times with feedback, many decisions were based on gut, or this person likes Pilates, so thumbs up. I was like, okay, no, we needed a better way for us to be able to give feedback and make those hires. It really did feel like the wild, wild west, and as mentioned, we had a ton of third-party vendors and agencies, so when we were thinking about what we needed to do next in terms of the hypergrowth and scale, we needed to start small, and we had to start with driving adoption for our own team. With that, it's difficult. Everyone has their own way of doing things, but it was just trying to explain a lot of the why. When with Greenhouse, everyone was trying to get on the same page with scheduling and how important it was to have everything in that with the system. And I'm not gonna lie, there was a lot of pushback. I've been doing recruiting for 20 years. My folders work just fine. And it's okay, do what you need to do. Especially everyone was just very siloed. Everyone had a lot of recs who were moving really fast, so just keep going. But for me, as the pseudo, Greenhouse ambassador of the team, it was trying to figure out the why. So for example, again, with keeping notes on resume and paper, what if you forget that paper? Or what if you spill coffee over the paper and the resumes and your notes are gone? So I was just trying to find those why moments. And there was a day where someone forgot their notebook or folder and didn't have the notes. So trying to, again, explain why putting this all into Greenhouse in the system in one place is helpful. Also, too, especially if a recruiter leaves, then you lose all of that data. So really just trying to push why everything is important in Greenhouse. So what works today might not work tomorrow, and we definitely quickly learned that. In terms of hypergrowth or just growth in general, we didn't have that luxury of a slow burn of being able to stabilize. You're like, okay, well, this is working now, like we'll reevaluate next year. You know, we were growing and growing to the point where it's like, okay, it's not gonna work next quarter, it's not gonna work next month, it might not work next week. So you really have to think futuristically of, okay, what do we have to do now and what are we gonna be able to do later? So really thinking at every step of the process of, is this scalable? A lot of things were scalable when we were just a few recruiters all in one office together, but now, you know, we have two short-term offices where our recruiting team is split, where you can't just go down the hall and talk to someone and ask like, oh, hey, do you remember talking to that person last year? Like, what were they like? So you need to make sure it's scalable, and you know, things break and that's okay. But as you're putting new processes in place, you need to think ahead of what will work now, what will work in the future, and you know, everything will be overwhelming, but I think that is part of the growing pains. And so prioritization and communication is very important. And like what I like to say to the team, like with FabFitFun, it's like a Britney Spears song. Like, we're not a girl, like not yet a woman. Like, we're not like super startup, but we're not this like enterprise company as well. So you're just trying to figure out like, yes, sometimes we need to act more like a woman and have like these structured processes in place. But like, as you're growing and moving fast, sometimes you have to be nimble and flexible and just be more of like that girl aspect. But so when we're thinking ahead and prioritizing and figuring things out, one thing that we put in place, again, it's thinking small, is having an on-site interview calendar. So remember, not everyone was using Greenhouse, and they weren't scheduling in Greenhouse. It was on their own calendar. There was someone that was sick one day and couldn't come to the office. We had no idea if they were having any on-site interviews that day. So it sent us into a panic. So we had an idea to create a shared calendar for our recruiting team and people team for everyone to put on our on-site interviews all on that calendar, imported through Greenhouse. So that way we can all have that visibility. That way if someone was sick or something happens, we all know who's coming on site that day. And also very helpful for our facility teams and reception so they can see who's on site as well. Yeah, and something that we identify new team members, like when we're hiring recruiters, is, you know, if they have that ability to be flexible, agile, and scale because, you know, things change. With larger teams, you'll have more varying needs, like how do we treat candidates that reapply if that data wasn't there and we had that information, or again, as I was saying, like multiple offices, you can't just shout down to like Karen. And as we're in our stage of growth with FabFitFun, we are seeing a lot of repeat applicants. And because we didn't have the data of notes from a recruiter or even notes from an interview team, that wasn't able to help us really identify what this candidate looks like for us now. All right, so I'm excited to talk about, you know, two of my favorite reports. I was the only one on my team that had ever used Greenhouse before, so I took it upon myself to dive further into the system. And Ashley said, like, I am not a data analyst by any means. I do not know how to use a pivot table, but I'm like, there had to be another way. Like, so just trying to dig into Greenhouse to see what I could find. So I'll walk you through two of my favorites. The first one is the candidate quality by source. So this is really helpful in two particular reasons. One, with vendors. As I mentioned, we had a ton of vendors, not only agencies, but a lot of third-party job boards. So when we're growing fast, we didn't know what we wanted to keep. A lot of the vendors were like, well, look, like you got all these applications like through us, like, of course, like you should resign. I'm like, let's dig in further. In doing this source, you're able to see how many applications you get and like the quality of the source and applications and as they go through. So while we might have received a ton of applications from a job board, it didn't result in any hires and not many on-site interviews, whereas we were able to compare that to other vendors where maybe we didn't get as many applications, but the quality of them was much higher where it resulted in a lot of offers. And that was really helpful in going to other executives to really show that data of why we want to pay for something or renew something or choose not to renew something. As well as beyond vendors, thinking about it as like referrals. Our co-founders were like, we need more referrals. We don't have enough like referrals that we're hiring. So then they say that to our VP of talent who wasn't really in our Greenhouse system. And she's like, we need referrals. They say we need more referrals. Like, go ask everyone for any referrals. And I'm just like, again, like, no, like we have a lot of referrals. So let's, again, dive deeper. And I was able to show them, like, last month we received over 100 referrals from the company. And you know what? Like, only like a very small fraction came on site and none of them were hired. So it's not like this throwing spaghetti on the wall. We need more referrals. It's like, we're getting referrals, we're just not getting the right referrals. So using that as a teachable moment, it's like, okay, we need to pivot, we're getting them, but we need to be more, don't just like, send us anyone you have that's smart. Like, no, we need to be more specific and more detailed of what we're looking for to help that source. So for the next report, I'm going to talk about the candidate survey. So that's something recently we've adopted at FabFitFun. So has anyone had any issues with, candidates venting on Glassdoor at all? Maybe show a hand. Maybe it's just us. I was like, I'm not sure. So that was happening a lot, and we are in this Yelp generation where people feel like if anything happens, they need to talk about it and they need to tell everyone. And we were seeing a lot of that interview activity on Glassdoor. I'm like, I felt like I was on Shark Tank. There had to be another way to be able to pull that information, to give them an opportunity to speak before they were running to Glassdoor. So I was like, wait, okay, let's use the candidate survey that Greenhouse has. So we started small. This wasn't something that I adopted throughout the whole company, but there's a great feature where you can filter departments. So we started with a few key departments to see what would happen. And then with that data, we were able to get some really useful numbers of how we were able to kind of decipher how our on-site interview experience was going and how we can improve it. Because a lot of times, hiring managers were just like, oh, like everything's fine, or you would try to give them feedback. And for example, there was a hiring manager who loved having her 2 Yorkies in the office when people were coming on interviewing. And she thought this was fine, but not everyone likes dogs. They are distracting, they were barking. But she's like, well, this is like what every day is like here. So if they don't like it, then it's like, no, okay. So try to give her that feedback. She wasn't listening, and there was an option. So spoiler alert, I did not know that when you do the candidate survey in Greenhouse and pull that report, if you download it into Excel, you can see not only the data and the numbers, but comments that people leave. So I was scrolling through that and looking at comments, and someone did leave a comment that she felt uncomfortable that there were dogs in the interview process. So having that data and that real-time comment and feedback and example, again, explaining the why, she's just like, oh, you're right. Because in the moment, people are like, they don't care. They'll think it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. But it's not fine. Look, when we have data to show it. So I think this feedback is really helpful to not only help with key metrics and data of how you can improve your on-site interview experience, but also just that real-time feedback that you can share with your hiring teams, and also hopefully alleviate that from people going to Glassdoor. So process gets harder as you scale. Hindsight is always 20/20. Implementing just gets really difficult, and you wish. My biggest piece of advice is to try to implement process early on as possible. When we were 3 recruiters, that might have been easier to get everyone in the room, figure things out, iron it out, to now, well, we're 9 recruiters, and it's much different to just try to get things there. The results from these surveys will not only be useful if the data is correct, and with that, you can't have good data out unless you have good data in. And with starting small, it was just trying to get everyone on board with candidate source and making sure that data is correct. Because if you're running those reports, then they're like, oh, we're going to get rid of this vendor, we're not getting any hires. And if someone's like, but we do have hires, and it's like, well, look, I have all these people I hired from this place, but it's not reflected in Greenhouse. So it's, again, finding those teachable moments, how just important the candidate source is. So we've been trying to really just dive into that and double checking candidate source before making a hire, and even trying to showcase to your teams as well, even making sure that the recruiter is assigned or the coordinator, so you can effectively see their progress that they're doing. And just, smallest things make the biggest difference, and even something like candidate tags. As we're in Hypergrowth, it's utilizing something like that feature to be able to say oh, future hire in this area, or future customer service, or just be able to keep track of individuals as we're getting a lot of candidates and a lot of recruiters. And as I mentioned, in January, we did go through our Series A, and we realized through that part that data integrity is really important, and if we don't get our things together now, it's gonna be much worse, because it did feel like it was breaking when we were trying to go through that due diligence. So like, where are these offer letters? And if, like, where are all these documents? And if it lived within a recruiter's email or something that we didn't have access to, we didn't have it. Previously, we were using Adobe Sign, and that wasn't an enterprise system for us. So we decided to shift and go to DocuSign that was integrated with Greenhouse. And because of that, now when we send offers, it automatically gets stored and saved into Greenhouse in that candidate's profile. So if we ever have to audit again or go through any additional due diligence, all of that is there and won't be living in a recruiter's inbox. But in terms of what's next, it is onward and upward as we continue to scale. What was once just started off as myself at FabFitFun on the recruiting team and people team, we now have 9 recruiters and a people team of over 30. We're actively working towards improving our onboarding experience, giving all these new hires, the ability to have a positive experience as we're getting them all in. Also with headcount approval, we've been trying to work on our approved headcount plan for what feels like the longest time, and it's like already June, and still trying to fine tune that. But we're really excited going into 2020 to see how we can get our finance and accounting teams in Greenhouse and use that for an approval process to kickstart new roles. And just capacity planning as well. We're in 2 short-term offices at the moment in West Hollywood that are just down the block from each other, but still, like, that feels so hard of like people going back and forth. How does the on-site interview process going to work at this office or at that office, or are we gonna have to do video interviews? So trying to think what that's gonna look like as we scale, if we get larger offices, and then hoping for our large new HQ build out in sometime of 2020. But in general, it's not always pretty and easy, but we're doing it. I think for the most part, everyone is always like best practice in terms of like, what do you mean people aren't leaving interview feedback? It's like, we weren't even getting people to show up for the interviews. So like, we needed to start somewhere. It's like the feedback will come, and like, yes, it's up, like best practice. We're not there yet, but let's just get people to show up first. Let's make sure people are knowing what to ask first, and then we'll get there. So it's, again, finding the teachable moments about the why and not being afraid to think big and not being afraid to pivot. But now I will pass it back to Kelsey, who will take us home with some key takeaways.
Thanks, Angela. So you'll notice a little bit of different story from Zola. We're a little bit further along in our ATS and our talent operations journey. We're focused on adoption and now really that enhancement stage. They both went through 3 reports. Whether or not you use Greenhouse, those are really good metrics to start thinking about. Those are the top 3 reports I work with all my new customers on to start understanding what data you have today and then building from there. Hopefully you learned some key takeaways from both of them, but if not, I'll share what I learned. So there's 4 key things I think were consistent across both of their stories. The first one is consolidating ownership. Recruiting operations doesn't really be effective if it's scattered amongst different teams, whether it's your hiring managers or if the recruiters aren't aligned. So wrapping your arms around that and bringing it back to yourself and the recruiting team to make sure that you guys are the decision makers and you guys really have the power when it comes to what's next for the talent program. Process first. My favorite thing to say to my customers is good data in is good data out. And you can only have good data in if you and the entire team are aligned on how you do that. If you move stages at different times, for example, one recruiter might move a candidate stage right after the interview, the other one might move it a week after the interview, you're gonna have different pass-through rates and histories when you're looking at that holistically. So making sure the team is aligned on when and how you move stages, how you schedule, and that all that data is stored in one place. And use the data you do have. If you think you have dirty data, use that to hold your teams accountable. Don't be afraid to run reports because your data isn't perfect. Make sure you're starting early and just iterating often. Once you have that data, make sure you're also using that to help drive adoption. As we both heard from both speakers, stakeholder buy-in really begins at day 1. It's change can be scary, anticipate some resistance, and try and isolate those teams and loop them in early for feedback. So again, they feel a part of the process, not like you're forcing it on top of them. And lastly, think ahead. Always plan for the future and make sure you're challenging your own status quo. You should be planning now for what you're gonna need, whether it's tools, systems, processes, or people, when you're twice the size. So make sure you're always thinking ahead and looking at what's next. We have about 5 minutes left, so we're happy to take some questions as well. There's 2 mics on either side of the room. Please feel free to line up and if you have questions for anyone on the stage.
Not on.
Oh.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Robert with Enjoy.com, and I wanted to ask about the time to hire report. It is based on when an applicant applies for the role to when they are extended an offer. Something that we've been running into is that when candidates are just sitting in the application review stage for quite some time because we just left the role open to build up the pipeline, but we didn't actually reach out. So it makes it look like it's a lot longer than it needs to be. Any suggestion to get around that?
Yeah, so 2 things in particular about the reports if you're using them in Greenhouse. Time to hire is going to look at the date the job is open until the date the job is closed. So we're looking at how long we're actively in the process. If you have candidates sitting in the stages for too long, I would definitely recommend that you're updating it as much as possible and be more aligned on that process like I mentioned. The other thing to keep in mind is we also have the hiring speed report. That's going to look at the candidate. So that's going to look at the date they applied to the date they sent the offer. So you have 2 reports, you can kind of use that to compare how long is a recruiter actively working on the job versus how long is the candidate in the process. So I would focus on running that hiring speed report and using that to hold recruiters accountable of, hey, we're not actioning this candidate. One of them had a story about what happens, and again, using the time to hire report to hold those teams accountable.
Yeah, that happens to us often at FabFitFun, and we've been trying to use that as the reason of why they're sitting there can always vary, but we've been trying to utilize that of like, are we ready to post this job? Like the hiring manager would be like, I need you to post this job right now. Like, okay, we post it, like we're getting 100, 200 applications a day. And then they're like, oh, like, well, I just like want to chill for a second. I don't want to look at them yet. But I'm like, but where are they going to go? They can't just sit here because again, that's going to affect your data. So I've tried to use examples of when that happened to be sure of like, hey, like, are we really ready to go like with this? Like, can we make this live? Do we want to take it down? Are you sure? And that's not always going to be the case of like why they're sitting there. It could be for plenty of other reasons, but I've just been trying to use that as an example of when to kick a job off and explaining to the hiring manager of like candidates keep asking, like, or I'll get messages on LinkedIn like I applied, haven't heard anything, and showing that to the hiring manager of like this is why we can't open up a role when we're not ready.
Thank you.
Cool. That's said.
Hi, I'm Chad from Chronicle Security. I have a question about, our recruiting coordinators also own like data integrity in our systems, but what I found, I'm really confident about the data they enter into the system. What I have questions about is how do you close the loop with candidates that maybe came for a debrief, the coordinator's not in that conversation, we decide to reject them. How do we make sure that like we're closing the loop there and that the coordinator is rejecting and closing people out like systematically? Do you have any audits or anything that you do to make sure about this?
Sure. So our coordinator sits in our debriefs. I don't know, every company is different depending on confidentiality or whatever their specific role is, but our coordinator walks through the entire process with their candidates. They're probably the candidate's best friend. I put them in charge, and I think my recruiting manager can agree, they're in charge of the candidate experience. So why not have them in that final debrief so really they can know, yes, we're moving forward, no, we're not, we're putting a hold, whatever that decision is, it's ultimately on them to make sure it's communicated to the candidate appropriately. So I think if you have the opportunity to do it and you feel comfortable with it, keep them in the debrief. One, they're really good at taking notes, so why not have them there to do that, make sure that everything is updated while they're in the system. And if we don't move forward with the candidate is literally rejected on the spot.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
This side.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from a company called Pendo. We're about 350 employees. And one thing I'm really curious about is in the adoption stage. I think we have a really good idea, and our recruiting team has a really good idea of our processes, but aren't necessarily great about this adoption, getting our hiring managers all aligned. So I'm curious, very logistically and tactically, how you're able to do that. Like, did you host hiring manager trainings? Do you have documentation on it? How did you make sure that all leadership, all interviewers were getting a consistent message?
Yeah.
So we made it an all-company initiative. So we actually took an entire all-team meeting where all 3 offices were together and we said, this is Greenhouse. Welcome to the future. We just let them know this is our new system. This is what we're going to be utilizing. We walked through some of the simple parts of it. So this is how you can refer people. This is how, if you're an interviewer, how you become one and what that means and what the feedback looks like. And then we actually took the steps, which this is a bit of a take on for your team, but we took the steps to have individual trainings, yes, for hiring managers, individual trainings for only interviewers, and then individual trainings for everybody in the company that would maybe be on a panel, maybe not. And then our recruiting team actually every month does interview training. And so they understand what the process looks like if they do ever become an interviewer. So it's a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's definitely a process. But having that buy-in from our leadership to say, listen, if this is our system and if in the future our finance team wants to use it to figure out what our headcount looks like, and if we want other teams ultimately utilizing it in more ways than one, then that's the best possible way. It's just from the very beginning say, this is everybody's system to utilize and this is how you can use it.
We've been trying to take it team by team because, trying to showcase that the engineering team might be different of the merchandising team, of like how to use it, and just trying to find those, like what I would say, like influencers of like who people are using it in the hiring teams, and like using their influence across like their department or the company to be like, oh yeah, like of course they filled out the feedback, or using it to like going to the merchandising team, like, well, I don't know, like marketing filled out all their feedback, they're showing up, like, well, like we will too, like, so it's just trying, like for us, it's just more personalizing that introduction, and sometimes it's emails and what can only do so much, or even like Slacks, like I'm just right there with them, just like showing them how easy it is.
Awesome, thank you so much.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for attending. If you still have questions, feel free to grab us after. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for coming.
you.